Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to continue our look at the Great War, World War I, and today we're going to see the first fighting happening in Europe. We're really going to cover years from 1914 through 1917. Now, one thing I did not mention for those in my class that are watching this, this is going to be a very brief look at World War I. And the reason we do so is because next year, when you guys take world history, you examine World War I much more in depth. And this year, we're kind of focusing, being an American history class, we're going to focus really mainly on the U.S. involvement in this war, which it had vast involvement and very, very much so turned the tide of war. But we'll get there eventually. But my point here is that this was a major, major conflict, so don't minimize that by how little time we're actually taking a look at this over the course of about 4 lectures. But today we're going to look at how the war was going, and one reason that the United States kept out of this as long as they could, because it was not going well. It was quite violent. Let's go ahead and take a look at our notes. So when we left off, we had just seen that pivotal event, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, and the war would begin within basically a month. So again, the Central Powers, if you are Germany right now, I want you to look at the map and I want you to identify what is Germany's biggest problem. And I think it doesn't take long to understand that from the very onset of this war, they are surrounded. Right? They are basically surrounded. You have Russia to the east, you have France to the west, and frankly, you have the British to the north that, with their strong navy, are attempting to control the seas. Germany's surrounded, and if Germany expects to win this war, they're going to have to move swiftly. So, what we see triggered is an event, a plan that has actually been in the high levels of German command for decades at this point, called the Schlieffen Plan. You know, every nation has plans on if they were to go to war with another country, you know, what they could do, what options they would have available. And this was developed decades before, called the Schlieffen Plan. And what this called for was to avoid the major boundary with France, and ultimately this was their plan to win the war. Okay, Part 1 basically called for throwing everything they had at France. Defeat France, because they saw that as the weaker of the two enemies here. And once they defeat France quickly, they can turn all their forces eastward and defeat Russia. Russia is much larger, has more manpower, but it was going to take them a little bit longer to mobilize, and the Germans knew that. So if you could get into France, if you could take them out, neutralize France before the British could even respond, that was going to go a lot farther in your cause than anything else. But even though France and Germany share a border, that border was heavily defended, and you know, the French basically already had a number of their forces along that border, and the Germans in this plan, frankly, avoided it. Now, the only way to avoid that is to invade a couple of other countries, and that is the Netherlands and Belgium. Now, both of those countries at the onset of this war had declared what they called neutrality. Okay, now that meant that they were not taking either side, and they wanted to be left out of this. But in 1914, Germany begins the Schlieffen Plan and invades the nation of Belgium. This is going to be a big problem. Okay, this is going to be one thing that kind of turns at least some of the world against Germany. You can see there, and just before I get off this slide, you can see on that map on the bottom right how they were expecting to cut through Belgium really without any problems, and to swing all the way around and hopefully attack Paris basically from the west instead of the east. And they thought they could catch the French off guard. And frankly, it was a pretty good plan, but it's not going to work. They're going to get bogged down in Belgium. They don't expect the Belgians to fight back. They just kind of expected them to lay down, and so they do start having some trouble in Belgium, and the French are able to basically reposition their forces much faster than the Germans expected, and so the Schlieffen Plan is going to fail here, but I'll be honest, it does work for them for the most part 20 years later when Adolf Hitler does somewhat the same thing, taking out Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg before he invades France. So good plan, just about 20 years too early, and they needed the technology to develop a little bit better. All right, next one. So this invasion of Belgium, this is going to be a major moment in the war, because when they invade Belgium, like I said, not only does it slow the Germans down and they end up kind of having to fight there for a lot longer than they expect, but the other side of this conflict, the Entente powers, are going to use this event as, frankly, a major propaganda moment. Okay? You can see here in this this poster, "Remember Belgium, buy bonds, Fourth Liberty Loan." They're trying to get the British people to buy war bonds, and how are they doing that? They're applying to, you know, your sentiments, your emotions. Here you have a notable German soldier. You can tell from his, you know, pointy helmet and his bushy mustache. And what's going on here? You know, of course, he's dragging this poor girl, God knows where, and you know, flames in the background. Just a horrific scene, right? The Entente powers wanted people to they wanted to demonize Germany, of course. I mean, this is always the goal in wars, to demonize the enemy and to, frankly, make your populace, you know, more fearful of them. So they're going to play up this event. In fact, they end up calling it the Rape of Belgium. That you know, Germany violated their neutrality, came through, and you know, this is going to be an event that they focus on to you know, to turn that storyline into Germany being the, and not saying that Germany was right in doing this. It was a major moment, but this is going to be heavily propagandized. And you know, propaganda is used in every war to try and get people to do certain things, whether that is to sign up to fight, to hand over money in the form of, you know, buying war bonds, and they appeal to different human emotions. You can see on the left there, "Beat back the Hun" with Liberty bonds, but you know, you look at this monstrous figure that's creeping over the ocean towards you know, towards you, and a bloody dagger, and just, you know, terrible. So, you know, using fear to try and propel people to do certain actions, in this case by Liberty bonds. In the middle, you know, the patriotic sentiment, you know, protecting this young girl from the German, you know, another example of you know, appealing to one's, well, frankly, like masculinity and heroism, you know, be the hero and stop the Germans here. So propaganda is going to be used in this war. So next up on the list, we see as Germany makes their way into France. Like I said, France, they respond a lot quicker than Germany expects, and they dig in defensively. They literally, quite literally, dig into the ground. This war is going to be fought in trenches, and both sides are going to basically find their lines, and they're going to dig down. And they're going to be fighting from those trenches for the most part the rest of the war. Now, these trenches extended for miles, both backwards, sideways. You can see the aerial photograph on the right, how just complex these trench systems were. A couple unique things about fighting in the trenches here. You know, first of all, I have to say that this, to me, would be one of the most terrifying wars to fight in, because, I mean, when you were down in the trench, you didn't know what was coming. You didn't know if, frankly, a shell was going to fall into your trench at any moment, which of course happened all the time. You didn't know if poison gas was going to be thrown towards your way. You didn't know if there was going to be a soldier pop over the edge and jump into your trench and bayonet you. Just a terrifying ordeal if you were a soldier in this war. But this war is, as I said, going to be entirely fought in the trenches. And imagine what it would be like. You know, the French line of latitude is, I think, roughly right around where kind of the New England area is. So they're going to experience a very similar winter in some ways. So imagine being in someplace like New York during not only the winter time, but also in the rainy season in the spring. These trenches are going to become basically mud pits, and cold mud pits at that. It is going to be one of the worst parts of the war is just simply surviving the trenches themselves, because they are not hospitable, and the soldiers are going to lose sometimes their feet, their hands, their teeth, and their lives because of the conditions of these trenches. But that is how the war is fought. So basically, there are two what we call fronts that develop: the Western Front, in which you have this line basically extending down from Belgium through France, back towards the border of Germany and France. That is going to be where most of the fighting occurs. That is called the Western Front. And even though it would shift, in some cases, a few miles, for the most part, they're going to be fighting along that Western Front for the next 4 years. On the other side of Germany, and this is what Germany was hoping to avoid with the Schlieffen Plan, a two-front war where they had to divide their forces and therefore would only be 50% as strong. On that side, they are going to develop a trench line with the Russians called the Eastern Front. And again, Russia is going to play a very interesting part of this war. We'll talk about them later on. I don't know if this is going to actually work. I grabbed this off. Is that going to try to open a link? Yeah, we'll see here. Hold on. All right. Very fast, difficult to see, but a very good graphic how the Western Front was formed. So here you can see the movement towards Paris. Sorry, it's in French there, but I really liked how this graphic was created. And you can just see, with each, somebody's taken great length to identify each of the different parts of the battalions and all that. But you can see by 1914 how the trenches have fully developed. The Germans almost get to Paris. They almost do, but they are stopped short. Okay. Sorry, I was hoping that would play inside there, but it did not. All right, now the war that is going to be experienced by all sides here is a war that, unlike any other, the Industrial Revolution has really made an impact in how war is fought. And, it's kind of the common saying when you study military history that wars are fought with the strategy of the last war. And that's definitely the case here. They're going to, that partly explains why there's so much death, because the weapons have completely changed, but the strategy has not. And so we're going to see how that doesn't really mesh. One thing that has changed is the navies, okay, the naval action. Now, Britain had the strongest navy in the world at the time. That is going to be challenged, though. And so, like I said at the very beginning, where Germany's kind of surrounded, right, with Britain to the north, they're controlling the seas. Britain will form a blockade around Germany, stopping any materials from coming into Germany. And Germany understands that Britain's choking them out, that they have to stop this naval threat. Well, if you can't beat them on top of the water, then you can try to beat them underneath the water. The Germans are going to focus on building up basically submarines, and they call them U-boat, but this was an early form of a submarine that was extremely deadly, extremely difficult. This is before things like sonar, so the British were kind of ducks in the water, where these submarines could attack from basically anywhere. It was very, very difficult. So a lot of this war is going to be fought on the water. But the German military strategy here, and I really want to focus on this verbiage, unrestricted submarine warfare. What that means is that they are going to attack any boat, not just a military boat. They, especially in the North Sea area, they are going to be attacking all boats, and they announced this to the world. In fact, there were advertisements taken out in American newspapers. Americans, if you are traveling to Europe, realize that a state of war exists and that Germany has declared a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, that there's a chance your ship may be attacked. Like they took out advertisements warning Americans that this was a potential to happen. And this is going to be another major spark that we'll talk about at the end here. Now, again, this does not do it justice at all, but we are going to talk very briefly about some of the major battles that took place leading up to American involvement in World War I. And I want you. There's a couple. I'll try to identify what I consider to be the most important part of these battles. And so you don't need to memorize the dates per se, but you need to know what made them important. And in each case, I often put the casualty list, which let me define that further. A casualty is either dead or wounded. So basically, someone who is forced to be removed from conflict. And when I say wounded, I'm not talking like a hangnail. I'm talking like a leg got blown off. So often they were fully removed from battle for the rest of the war. The first major battle was called the First Battle of the Marne, 1914. And the most important thing you need to know here is that it stopped the German advance into France. This is what stopped the Germans from continuing towards Paris and taking the capital. Look at these numbers. We have never before seen numbers like this from a war. On the Entente side, you had 263 casualties and then 220 Central Power casualties on their side. So right away, and literally one of the first major battles of the war, we have 500,000 men that are either dead or severely wounded. This would just increase over time. And what we're going to start seeing is that they realize very early on this is going to be a very, very deadly war. Another battle you need to know, and this one is unique because it takes place on the Eastern Front, but also in 1914, the Battle of Tannenberg. And this was when the Russians finally mobilized and got their act together and attacked Germany and kind of forced Germany into a two-front war. Germany would declare victory after this battle, and Russia would lose 250,000 men. Russia, and by the way, we're kind of foreshadowing what is to come later on with even our Cold War unit, which takes place after World War II. Russia is going to lose more manpower in these world wars than anyone, and it's partly what develops their national identity of, frankly, they do see themselves as kind of as the victim of these wars, and it's hard to disagree with that, given the tremendous amount of life that they will lose, and more so in World War II. But Russia is it's always been kind of a backward nation, and here they are experiencing the worst parts of the war. 1916, and we are skipping a lot, and I hate that. I wish we could spend a lot more time on this, but the next major battle that I would like you to know, 1916, the Battle of Verdun. This is one of the longest battles in human history, and it was fought from February to December of that year. You can see that the French would lose 500,000 men, the German would lose 400,000. So almost 1,000,000 men lost in this one battle alone. So hopefully you're starting to understand this trend of just how deadly this conflict really was. Take a look at that fort in the bottom right, that French fort, over the months of warfare. I mean, just completely demolished. The weaponry that is being used, the artillery that's being used, was unlike anything we had ever seen in the history of mankind. And it's so deadly, but the tactics are not changing. And that is so hard to understand, is that, just like, these generals, they really don't take into account that, the other side has a machine gun that is spraying 100 bullets every few seconds, and they charge right into them, just like it's, the Civil War, the Napoleonic Wars. That strategy just doesn't work. One of the most horrific battles of the war is the Battle of the Somme, which took place along the Somme River. And even though it was a 5-month battle, you can see that the British suffered over 400,000 casualties, the French 200,000, and the Germans 650,000 casualties. So what is that, 1.2 million in this one battle? Guys, I hope to put that in perspective. The United States hasn't lost 1.2 million men in all the wars we've ever fought combined. This is one battle, okay? When we're talking even it's just unprecedented amounts. This is unlike anything we would ever see. And at the end of this, what did the British gain for their victory and their sacrifice? 5 miles of land. 5 miles. That wouldn't even reach across our city. Okay, so this is becoming increasingly unpopular. This war throughout the world. A lot of young men are going off to fight and die for. Frankly, and remember, there's a lot of frustration because what caused this war? The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Okay, but you got a lot of boys from the countryside in Britain saying, "How does that affect me?" Right? Why am I fighting this war? Now, on the other side of the ocean, Americans are watching this, and we had not jumped in early on. There wasn't, frankly, much stomach for it. We were watching the newspapers. We were seeing how many men were dying each and every day. And Americans, by this point, have, frankly, turned to more kind of a return to isolationism. And frankly, you've had some newer ideas, pacifism, where people believe that war was just evil, that it should always be avoided, that the United States should be kind of this model for peace throughout the world, that America should never engage in a war. Okay. You also had groups, primarily for religious reasons, that were opposing the war as well. And frankly, once the war does come, who will refuse to join, they call themselves conscientious objectors. So just understand that there's this rising sense of American neutrality, that Americans don't want to be in this war, and we won't for the first 3 out of the 4 years. But that does not mean that the American people would not make up their mind and to have some sympathy towards one side. The Entente side, and by the way, as I mentioned in our last lecture, it was a question to be asked of which side, if America were to come in on this conflict, which side would they come in on? It was not a straight answer. So there were some things that pointed us towards the Entente side. And, number one, you have cultural reasons, right? We do share things like a language, common history with Great Britain, common form of government. So right away we have kind of that connection to the Entente side. Also, that highly propagandized event, the rape of Belgium. Americans, looked at Germans as being beastly, as you can see in this propaganda poster. So again, that kind of increased sympathy for the Entente side as well. Now, events really start to take a change in 1917. This is a pivotal moment of the war, because Russia, who, of course, Germany was trying to avoid in the early on stages of this war, they did not want to fight a two-front war. By the end of 1917, Russia is going to withdraw from the war. Now, man, this looks like Germany is about to win this thing, and I truly mean that. Once they find out that Russia's withdrawing from the war, they no longer have to fight a two-front war, and they can throw all their forces along that Western Front. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So why did Russia withdraw from the war? They were having a revolution in their country, and it would be a successful revolution in which you would have Russia basically kick out their king, their Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II, in the February Revolution. He abdicates. He decides to step down. You guys will study a lot more about Tsar Nicholas in next year in world history. Fascinating time period here. But he abdicates the throne. He steps down. He says that Russia basically no longer has a monarchy, and there's a temporary or provisional government that gets installed. But they make a fateful decision to continue fighting the war. Part of the reason Nicholas had to step down was because the war was so unpopular in Russia that there were major protests happening in the cities. But the provisional government, I think the leader's name was Krasinski, he does not listen to the people. And, this reason that they kicked out the monarch, the provisional government just keeps doing the same old thing. And so Russians get even angrier that even though the Tsar's gone, no changes have really been made. And so, one of the most fascinating twists of this is that the Germans are paying attention to what's happening in Russia. They know this war is very unpopular back at home. And so they try to antagonize Russia a little bit. The man in the upper right-hand corner is Vladimir Lenin. Now, Lenin was Russian and had been basically exiled out of Russia for trying to overthrow the government, and had been living, I think, in Switzerland at the time. Germans understand that he wants to to lead a revolution. He wants to overthrow the system and install a communist system in Russia. The Germans smuggle Vladimir Lenin by train back to Russia with the hopes of starting a revolution in that country that Russia would eventually want to withdraw from World War I. And it works. It works like a charm. Lenin is smuggled back into the country by April. He finds himself back in Moscow. By October, they have overthrown the provisional government, and one of the first decisions that is made by Lenin, and again, simplifying those events, but there would be a lot more fighting that would take place among the different types of communists in Russia. But basically, one of the first decisions that is made by the new revolutionary government led by Lenin is that Russia would withdraw from the war. Now, here's the deal. They gave up a lot of land to Germany in this deal to withdraw, and that's going to come back to bite them in the end. I'm going to come back to this moment when I get to the Treaty of Versailles, but just know that by 1917, Russia is gone. Okay, Russia is out of this war, and now all of a sudden, Germany, the tide has turned. They are taking all that manpower, and they are pushing them to the Western Front, and man, it looks like it's almost over. I mean, Germany is so close to winning. Russia's out. Germany is amassing all of their troops, and then we start to have a series of events, and I'm going backwards in time a little bit because we got to build up to kind of the ultimate moment. So, again, I'm going to kind of allude to, remember our last unit, we talked about kind of the three strikes that led Americans towards war with the Spanish. We kind of have those same three strikes again, right? Propaganda, we talked about, yellow journalism in our last unit. Propaganda is going to play a big part in this war with the rape of Belgium. That's kind of strike number one, the brutality of Germany. And remember, in the Spanish-American War, we talked about the brutality of Spain against the Cubans. Well, here you have the brutality of the Germans against the Belgians in particular. Now, the next strike comes here in 1915 with the sinking of the Lusitania. Remember, Germany had declared unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning anything goes. They will shoot down any ship that comes across one of their U-boats. And it just so happened that in 1915, a passenger vessel called the Lusitania, a very large vessel, you can see how big this steamship was, sank. It was shot on by a German U-boat, and it was sank. About 1,200 people end up dying in that. About 128 Americans. This is kind of that next strike. So you have kind of like the USS Maine sunk. Here you have the Lusitania sinking, and this tragic event where Americans are dying, and Germany is directly to blame. But then you have the final strike, and what becomes known as the Zimmermann Note. The British intercepted a letter from Germany to the country of Mexico, to our southern border. And the Germans were basically offering Mexico a deal. They knew that America had, in the 1840s, had basically taken a number, basically half of Mexico, everything from California, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas. All of that had been taken from Mexico when we defeated them in the Mexican-American War. The Zimmermann Note, Germany offered Mexico the ability to regain that lost territory, okay, to regain what are now those U.S. states, if Mexico helped Germany. If they came in this war on the side of Germany and basically attacked the United States to keep us out of the action, that they would help, after the war came to an end, Germany would help Mexico reclaim that lost territory. This is the last straw, and President Wilson, who, by the way, in 1916 had won re-election with the motto, "He kept us out of war," well, by the next year, he's going to find himself pushing Congress to enter the war. And I put in here this quote because this is one of the first times we see this as one of the main reasons we go to war. And Wilson is saying that we have to defeat Germany to make the world safe for democracy. That phrasing is going to be used time and again throughout the 20th century, and this would become kind of the main motivation of the United States, to spread democracy by defeating tyrants around the world. Now, there's a lot of debate that can be had about that as to kind of the sincerity of it. But, is this something that America had to join at this time? The war was still very unpopular, but again, you got the brutality, the rape of Belgium, you got the sinking of the Lusitania, and now you have what looks like Germany trying to get Mexico to attack us. Not good, right? Not a good look. So, you have kind of that third strike, and Wilson does get Congress to vote for war. They do vote that we are at a state of war with Germany. And so they passed what's called the Selective Service Act, which still stands today. When you turn 18, you do need to register with the Selective Service. And if there's ever a war scenario, or a disaster scenario where they need young men of fit fighting age, they can call you up. And that is what they did here. We had a draft, and almost 3 million men were drafted into the armed services. Their official name would be the American Expeditionary Force. They were given the nickname of the Doughboys. There's debate on why they got that nickname. Remember, the war's already been going on 3 years, so some have suggested that they were kind of, soft soldiers coming into this hard combat. Anyways, there's different ideas on why they took that name. But ultimately, what they're going to find is that this is a new type of war, one that Americans had never seen before. And I tell you what, we're going to get into that a little bit more next time, talk about how deadly this conflict was from the very beginning for not only all the players in there, but now for the United States. So thanks again for paying attention, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.